تمام. تفكيش بنقدر معكوسات
Hello, everyone. We're going to get started, so I would like to invite you to take a seat. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this session on carbon capture, use, and storage. Today, our discussion will build upon an upcoming publication by the Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition titled Assessing the Viability and Economic Implications of Integrating Carbon Capture, Utilization and Storage Technologies into the Energy Transition and Article 6 Carbon Markets. The Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition is a global body of engineers and energy experts co-hosted by UNIDO and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network that advises the United Nations Secretary General. Before we get started with our panel discussion, I would like to welcome Mohammad Abu Zahra, Head of Middle East and North Africa at the Global CCS Institute and member of the Council of Engineers, to present preliminary findings from the upcoming publication.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here with us. So what we'll present today is some initial, more of like discussion points and findings. The Council of Engineers conducted some work and produced a concept paper on CCUS, and we thought it will be good to share these findings and our discussion points and the main issues with the wider audience, and to highlight that at COP. And that's part of the role for CEET, where we aim to discuss and highlight major technologies which are important for energy transition. So when we talk about CCS, or when we talk about emissions, we all agree that the increasing emission over the years, we have hit the levels of above maybe 38 gigatons carbon dioxide per year. And most of that, of course, coming from the fossil fuel consumption in the energy sector, but also in the industry. There's the hard-to-abate sector industries, where lots of carbon dioxide also produced from the process itself. And that builds the need for technology like carbon capture and storage, where we can decarbonize these hard-to-abate sectors and other sectors. So different scenarios has been produced on what technologies to deploy. Of course, we all agree, regardless of what scenario there, that we talk about toolkit of solutions. So renewable energy efficiency, fuel switching, nuclear, CCUS, all of these are needed to achieve the net zero targets in the different countries, and also to keep us within the 1.5 degrees scenarios. There have been some different scenarios published by the IEA and some numbers from the IPCC and other entities, where they consider the contribution of CCS in the range of maybe 8 or 10 or 12% of the total global emissions. So when we talk about numbers, IPCC, of course, confirmed that we cannot achieve the 1.5 scenario without carbon removal, including CCS from a source and directly from the air. BICS has been also as a technology confirmed with the IRENA report. Different numbers on how much CCS and carbon removal could contribute by 2050. But I think if we talk about 5 to 6 gigatons of carbon dioxide, that seems reasonable, which is maybe 8 to 10% of the global emissions currently for removal. And then other technologies need to deliver at similar levels to achieve the 1.5 degree scenario and net zero targets 2050, 2060 in the different countries. So we'll dig in deeper on CCS. We'll talk about why CCS is essential as we see it, what role it can contribute, where is the status, and then we will leave you with some questions on what are the main challenges and difficulties that we need as a community to work on. So decarbonizing hard-to-abate sector, hydrogen production, low carbon hydrogen production, or what's being called the blue hydrogen, is enabler for CCS technology, and they go hand in hand. Dispatchable low carbon power as well, negative emissions with BICS and carbon removal directly from the atmosphere. For those who are not familiar on what CCS is, so if we have a source of emission, then we need to separate the carbon dioxide from that source of emission. Could be a power plant or industrial site. There are different routes for that called post-combustion, pre-combustion, oxy-fuel. The captured carbon dioxide after being dehydrated and treated as required can be compressed and transported for a final destination. So CCS is presented as a climate solution. So the carbon needs to be stored in deep saline aquifers underground permanently, regardless if it was captured from a source or from direct air capture. Now, some of the carbon dioxide could be utilized. Some companies has been utilizing the carbon dioxide for enhanced oil recovery or chemical productions, but these are more of a shorter term solutions to generate some revenue for this industry or for the CCS until the cost is reduced. So the ultimate goal is to store the carbon dioxide underground. These are the different routes. So I said carbon can be captured, utilized, or stored. Most of the CO2 need to be stored. If we talk about post-combustion capture, as the name tells us, the separation of carbon dioxide happens after the power cycle. Then IGCC, or integrated gasification combined cycle, it is similar approach like the blue hydrogen production. So syngas will be shifted, carbon dioxide separated from the hydrogen, and the hydrogen can be utilized as it for transportation or as a fuel. Then the oxy-fuel combustion, which is a lower technology readiness level, where oxygen or higher concentration oxygen can be used in the power cycle to avoid the nitrogen from the flue gas. Now, when we talk about where do we stand in terms of level of maturity, we have the capture, the transport, and the storage. If we talk about the capture, the most conventional technologies, chemical solvent, physical solvents, similar to some extent what has been used in the gas processing technologies, like monoethanol amine solvents, and these has been around for tens of years. So these are fully conventional. There are more than 50 technology providers globally who can deliver full-scale, commercial-scale capture technology based on chemical solvent and physical solvents. What is needed for that is we need to work more on innovative solution to reduce energy requirement and cost. When we talk about transport and storage pipelines, we have been transporting gases in pipelines for a long time. There are like more than 8,000 kilometers of pipelines for carbon dioxide in the US and many other parts of the world. So what needs for the pipeline point of view is the monitoring to make sure that there is no leakage happen, and if it happens, we can detect it on time. The storage, there had been built a good record of projects, for example, the Sleipner and the Snøhvit projects in Norway, where they have been running for maybe a couple of decades or 3 decades, and there is some good record of information. But more references are needed at the storage end so we can de-risk the technology and build more trust. So what is needed in terms of innovation and potential future cost? Benefiting from economy of scale and innovation are important. What we see so far with the projects operational globally in the CCS, most of them are first of a kind projects. We need the technology providers and operators to build more, to learn by doing and start reducing the cost of the design with integration of new materials, process optimizations that can help reducing energy and therefore the cost. The concepts of hubs and clusters are emerging as an industrial concept where the different emitters can use common infrastructure, common facilities, and they can deploy the carbon capture for multiple sources of emission and then use a common injection sites. We talk about lots of global efforts. The market is growing. Policy and investment support still need to be strengthened more. We have seen some good progress in different regions, but there is more to be done to push the CCS deployment forward. If we talk briefly on how the projects look like, these reports coming from the Global CCS Institute, there are currently 50 projects operational with total capacity of 50 million tons per year being injected underground. Many of these is still using carbon dioxide for enhanced oil recovery. However, there are more than 600 projects in the pipeline at different stages of development, and 70% of these projects are aiming for dedicated geological storage for the carbon dioxide. So there is a shift into using CCS for storage rather than using it for enhanced oil recovery. There are another 44 projects under construction globally as well. So if we talk about the capacity, 50 million tons being injected as we speak. If all these projects become operational by 2030, that capacity will jump to around 400 million tons. An amazing good jump. But if we want to achieve our target, that number needs to double. So as a CCS community, we hope and aim to reach the 1 gigaton carbon dioxide injected by 2030 to achieve our targets by 2050, where the CCS can contribute maybe 5 or 6 gigatons by 2050. Quickly on the sectors, the dark dots are showing the operational projects. Of course, they go at the start for the low-hanging fruits, natural gas processing, methanol industry, fertilizers, because it is integrated in the process and it's cheaper. Carbon separation is cheaper if the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide if higher. However, we have seen increasing number of projects being announced or under construction in the hard-to-abate sector, in the power sector, and other industries. And that's where we see the major influence and effect of CCS will take place in the coming years. So public engagement is very important. Talking to policymakers and regulators are important to address some of the concerns or the misinformation about the risks. There are some unclarities on regulation in some part of the world, so we don't have still the same level of maturity when it comes to regulations and policies globally. So some countries like in Europe, for example, there are lots of good policies has been established that include CCS, detailed regulations and guidelines coming from the IPCC, from EPA in the US, but some other regions still don't have that level of details. And there are many open questions that need to be answered in some part of the world to engage the public and regulators. We shouldn't forget that when we talk about CCS, there will be also some benefits and elements related to job creation, finding a new industry, but a cleaner industry with the decarbonization option. A new expertise and level of expertise existed now in different communities can be helpful and utilized for the CCS. So some of the risks and uncertainties, who's responsible of what, clearance on if leakage happens, how that will be handled, stewardship, durations, financing, insurance of the CCS. Again, there are some good guidelines there we can refer to, but some regions still need to do more on defining these. Capacity of the transport, the storage. If regions don't have, for example, storage capacity, then there is a need for cross-border transportation and collaboration. And that is a concept linked to the hubs and clusters. Like we see now many hubs and clusters across region and cross countries in the North Sea, in Southeast Asia, where that would be required to transport carbon dioxide across borders. Capture efficiency and how that's aligned with the final destination. What is the design efficiency or capture? How much of that will be injected actually underground? And if we want to push the technology further, do we have the room for the innovation to start capturing 99% of the carbon dioxide in the flue gas? So there are some room for improvement, particularly on energy penalties and making the capture technology more efficient. I think I'm running out of time. So if we talk about reducing the cost of CCS, we mentioned learning by doing, moving that into multiple productions of units, technology improvement, reducing capital and operational costs. There have been some good incentives globally on supporting the initial projects, like mentioned the IRA in the US, some capital support and investment in Canada and in Europe, engaging the government for the initial funding of the projects. And then eventually that needs to come with improving an overall business model, sorry. Hubs and clusters, circular carbon economy concepts, integrating CCS into the carbon markets eventually could help as a source of fund, and utilization, if utilization will offer us a climate solution with a decent price and scale. So in summary, this paper, which is being finalized as we speak, looked at all aspects related to the CCUS that will be distributed within the UN institution. where we talked about the gigatons that's being managed annually, how we need to accelerate that, what are the challenges needed. There is a significant work needs to be done when it comes to incentives, policies, regulations, and business model. Overall, our conclusion when we look at what's happening in the CCS domain, good progress, promising. The last years has shown a major progress and improvement number of projects and engagement, and we see that also around this COP and the previous COP and all the international dialogue, but there's still more work needs to be done to accelerate the pace and the scale of the deployment of the technology. So I'll leave it here. Thank you very much and looking forward for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammad, for the insightful presentation and for sharing key findings of the upcoming publication. Now we will turn to the next segment of our session today, which will be a panel discussion on practical considerations around CCUS deployment. Then we will have a Q&A with the audience in case anyone has any questions. So now I would like to welcome Tobias Orthen from the Research Institute for Applied Knowledge Processing at Ulm, who will be moderating the panel discussion and introducing our panelists. Tobias.
Thank you very much. Okay, now it works. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Isaac. Thank you very much, Mohammad. As I said, my name is Tobias Orthen. I'm working with the council, and I'm very happy to welcome you all to this very interesting topic, and that the room is almost full shows that it has a very high relevance, especially also when we're looking at Article 6 and the current COP here in Baku. And let me first say that the Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition is producing various briefs over various topics from clean cooking, over energy efficiency labels, biofuels. I see Roberta here. And so we have a proper internal review process, and what you see and hear today is preliminary results from our policy brief on carbon capture. And we are right now currently in that, going through that review process. So all the council members making points today here, this is due to their individual experts and not necessarily on behalf of UNIDO or the council itself. So let me introduce to you our three panelists that you have not yet been introduced to. This is Mercedes Maroto-Valer. She's the champion and director of the UK Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre. Maybe the acronym IDRIC is what is good to be remembered by you. Then we have Nitin Arora. He's a program management officer at UNFCCC. You all know UNFCCC, and this is why we are very excited also to hear from you about CCS and Article 6. And then I'd like to welcome Radia Sedaoui. She's the chief of the energy department at ESCWA, the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. So having said that, let me directly jump into the topic. Mohammad, your presentation highlighted growth in various CCUS applications. And for me, it's always good to have examples that I really understand what is going on. So can you give 2 or 3 examples of key innovative projects that are happening right now, which we might not yet know?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we talked about some of the projects globally, the older ones that we know in Norway and other places like Sleipner and Snøhvit and so on. But I want to highlight 2 regions and specific projects that we didn't talk a lot in the past. I'll start in the Middle East. The first and only operational CCS project connected with the steel industry is in Abu Dhabi, where it has been operational since 2016. Capturing 800,000 tons of carbon dioxide and injecting that in some of the oil fields in Abu Dhabi. And there will be second and third phase of this project being deployed in the same country in the coming couple of years. If we go to China, China started installing carbon dioxide. Currently, they have the first 1.5 million tons per annum carbon captured from a coal-fired power plant. And that project is the first with Chinese technology at that scale. And that's an important project away from the application linked to the coal, but it's handling a lower concentration of carbon dioxide, where we need eventually to move in, and that's close to many of the industrial sectors. Also in China, they have installed an oxy-fuel combustion plant connected with the cement industry with more than 200,000 tons a year. So these are examples on how the industry is shifting. Now, of course, there are many examples in North America and Europe, similar scales and bigger with the hubs and clusters, but I picked these because steel, cement, lower concentration of CO2 are important way forward for CCS deployment.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting to see that all the time innovations are happening, and we need that for a broad rollout. And so I'd like to ask you, Mercedes, you're working with clusters, right? Industrial clusters, and this might be one way for possible CCUS large-scale rollout. And what are your experiences working with those clusters? And is this approach one means towards a large rollout, maybe also in emerging economies?
Yes, and thank you, Tobias. Yeah, you can hear me. So I think maybe I'm gonna start first by a very brief definition of what clusters are, because sometimes the word
exactly that's good. Thank you very much.
may not actually mean the same to everybody in the room here. In essence, a cluster of industries is a geographical area where you have quite a large number of different emissions coming from a range of industries. So typically you will have anything from, could be a steel mill to actually cement factories or petrochemicals, and they tend to be all co-located because they are sharing infrastructure. Another commonality is generally they are next to harbors, estuaries, rivers, maybe just because of infrastructure and logistics, but not necessarily. They are all next to some sort of a water proximity. And when you look into these clusters, these concentrated areas of different sectors, what you see is that actually they're already sharing infrastructure. In many cases, they are already working with CO2 and hydrogen. They have experience and know-how. And in many cases as well, they may already be doing some CO2 capture or hydrogen separation. So we do have areas where infrastructure and know-how is there. So that seems to be the first place, the ideal first steps in terms of decarbonizing industry. I should say as well that these industries, as you probably know, they tend to be difficult. It's the hard sectors to decarbonize. And when they are co-located, they actually can share the risks of that decarbonization. Now, if you look now within the context of the UK, so in the UK, back in March 2021, the government published the Industrial Decarbonisation Strategy. And the ambition there is to have 4 low carbon clusters by 2030 and the first world net zero cluster by 2040. The reason for that is because in the UK, 50% of the emissions come from industrial clusters. So just by taking a handful, because literally we're talking about a handful, we will be able to decarbonize 50% of our industry. Now, the question is how this approach, is this really something that you can take to other parts of the world, as you rightly asked, Tobias? And there is studies that have been published where there is actually over 10,000 industrial clusters across the world. And if you only take 100 of those 10,000 that I mentioned, you will be able to take down the global CO2 emissions by 5%. So you need to think about these are areas that if we tackle them, if we help them to decarbonize, we're actually decarbonizing a significant amount of our emissions. And not only that, we're actually de-risking the technology. We are demonstrating how this can be done, and therefore we are actually catalyzing that these technologies will be deployed in non-cluster sites as well.
So if I understand you correctly, the way forward with CCUS and especially hard-to-abate sectors is forming alliances, enabling cooperation, sharing, for example, infrastructure for higher efficiency. And this should then, in the ideal case, not only work regionally, but also internationally, right? This is why I'm looking to Nitin right now, because what is probably key at that COP here is the progress made on Article 6. So thinking about Article 6, the CDM in the Kyoto Protocol, what is your insight with regards to CCUS and Article 6?
Thank you, Tobias. And actually, I just want to take an opportunity to welcome you all, because this is a session which is organized by UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub. So I would like to welcome all the CEET members who are here in the room, since I am the project manager of UGIH. Now I come to your question without wasting any time on that. As you might have noticed in the media outlets, as well as if you're following up the discussions happening in the negotiations area, that CMA, the Conference of Parties who's managing the Paris Agreement, they have actually taken note of the work that has been done by the supervisory body of Article 6.4. And there are actually two main documents that have been approved by you can say supervisory body. One is related to the methodological development under Article 6.4, and the other one is related to removals. If you look at, I think, the situation with CCS, and I was noticing the presentation by Mohammad, and he mentioned that one of the main barriers is the cost associated with implementing CCS on the ground. And I guess, I mean, like, if you look at the incentives that may come up from emission reductions or removal part, because there are two elements. One is reduction that comes from the when you are capturing carbon from the point emissions, point source emissions, then it is qualified as a reduction activity and not a removal activity. Whereas, you know, you have a direct capture possibility also from the atmosphere, and we have technologies on the ground, not I guess not on scale yet, but I guess in future that will come up at large scale. When it comes to Article 6 particularly, you know that, well, if you look at carbon markets in general, I mean, like, CCS was included under CDM also, the previous market mechanism to incentivize such technologies. And it has been included in under Article 6 also, but I'm talking about 6.4 here. So you see sectoral scope 16 covers CCS as an activity under Article 6.4, whereas sectoral scope 17 talks about the removal activities. So the insight is that with the adoption of these two documents, we will see methodologies that are required actually to be developed, so that project activities on the ground can follow, is likely to come up. These methodologies will likely come up hopefully early next year. So the recent decision has chalked out a plan actually for these activities, and I hope that with methodologies coming up and then projects following them, there's a clear chance that these activities will get some incentives from the carbon markets as well.
Yeah, very nice. So that means the regulatory framework for large-scale implementation is basically there, if I understood you correctly, in the removal, but also in the reduction space under Article 6. And this leads me to Radia, because we've heard that complex projects is usually the characteristics of CCUS endeavors, right? And we heard from you that it's a lot of cooperation that is necessary. Cooperation on an international scale is your daily business, Radia, right? What do you think is the complexity of CCUS, yet another complexity in the already complex cooperation world, or do you think what has been done with regard to Article 6 is actually an enabler?
Thank you very much. I would like first to thank you for hosting us, and for UNIDO as the co-chair of the Secretary of CEET, also to conduct and support this work, and to bring all the research institutions working together on this. And I believe that the outcome of the report that I had the privilege to contribute to would really serve to not only as a tool for advocacy for CCUS, but let's go beyond that. I think this to indicate that maybe complexity is always about the way you see it, from where you see it as well. CCUS before, since now I'm wearing the hat of the UN, and I've been there since last 9 years, we're looking how the CCUS always we argue about the complexity in terms of how to make it commercial, cost effective, and happy that lately we have it within Article 6 that facilitated somehow at least the discussion toward that and how to unlock this huge potential.
if my colleague already did mention about the Article 6, specifically 6, 2, and 4, which may be the only way to operationalize when it comes to the CCUS, provided that the enablers are there, provided that we have a carbon market, and provided also that collaboration is there. When collaboration doesn't come just like that, you have other kind of enablers. Certainly policy and regulations need to be there. But at the end of the day, I mean, specifically the oil and gas sector, this is because we speak more about what comes at what represents the huge potential of CCS. It will remain basically bilateral, which will lead to the global, because regional is still limited in somehow, unless you are in a region like Europe where you have more consuming countries than elsewhere. Coming also from an experience where I had the privilege also to be as a young engineer in the first CCS project in Algeria, which so far give excellent results. It's under monitoring and storage. But at that time, we were thinking of this project as a bilateral collaboration where the government supported that in a way that make it a corporate social responsibility, but it had a commercial sense where you have your gas, less CO2, and when we have this, you need to act. And this is good that there are those who take the initiative, and I think Mohammad did mention what the GCC countries already are doing on that. So the complexity in terms of, if you put in terms of Article 6, I think any window that's open up to include the carbon removal and believe that carbon removal is a must and it's part of the equation, then just we need to undertake it. Now we need to work on these enablers. We need to work in terms of how to invest in the infrastructure in terms of storage, specifically cross-border in terms of transport and storage, but also how to create the carbon market, an adequate carbon market, how it works. Now coming from the Arab region and the GCC specifically, I think the complexity is not there in a way that we don't take it just from the heavy the heavy hard to abate sector like the industry. You need to see the whole value chain. This is where you bring more players. Always we put CCUS just on the exploration side. We have oil and gas, and basically this is where you have the potential. And then obviously you see that it's 80% of what you get, and then you need to work on that. But let's move a little bit on the other side. That's also CCUS having the electricity sector, and that's coal when a certain point remain a certain point. We should acknowledge it, that it's beyond that, although it's not the potential as I said in the oil and gas sector. But we need to basically look at how bilateral agreements between players, let's say oil and gas companies, producers and consumers, can help to unlock this potential. I don't believe that the commerciality and the cost, I made just to indicate it's an issue. It's not an issue for the simple reason, because if you take it from the circular economy perspective, the whole value chain, then CCUS is just bringing value on the social, economic, and environmental. So if we take this marginal cost of supply, if you take it from the outside of oil and gas, you added all these costs, then it's really commercial. It's already solving the problem in terms of climate, because we believe that the removal is a must. So I think Mohammad did mention on the scale carbon economy. We did work with the King of Saudi Arabia in this framework. When if you believe you take just this framework within reduce, then basically now we have a new target in reducing. But the second reusing have a huge potential to unlock these resources, and the CCUS will add in terms of how we can invest in the infrastructure of storage where you have the potential to do it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And when you say we need to look beyond the traditional oil and gas sector, that might, if I also understand you correctly, with the removals part under Article 6, BECCS, right, which is the bioenergy connected with carbon capture and storage, and that automatically then moves you more towards other countries as well that have huge biocapacity and huge capacity in that direction, right? So my question goes to Mercedes. Based on what we've heard so far, from your experience or from what you think, is the application of CCUS only something for already industrialized countries where the infrastructure is there? Or do you also see good opportunities to, for example, use the clustering approach as the underlying approach to also, you know, start creating value chains in middle and lower income countries?
Thank you. So I think maybe if I can make an observation first, and we talk about this race to net zero, but really the race is not going to be finished till everybody crosses the finish line. So that means developing countries, that means clusters, dispersed sites, all that has to actually go through the process. And in terms of the cluster approach, as I said before, there is quite a number of clusters worldwide. So this is not something that is specific of the UK. It may be called hydrogen hubs, or maybe called hubs in general, but it does exist across the world. Now, the question comes as well, as you say, what happens for those emerging economies where actually they may not have clusters, if that happens to be the case? I think in any way you look at this, CCUS is going to be a key player in reaching these net zero targets. And what we are doing through the cluster approach, through quite an extensive and deep partnerships, what we do is we de-risk technologies, we actually increase the know-how of these technologies, we can reduce the cost, and also very important as well, because it's not only technology, it has to do also with the skills. It has to do also with the policy and regulatory frameworks. It has to do with how you can go through all the permitting and planning till you actually get one of these CCUS plants going. And we're going through all that process. So the lessons that we are learning, we are sharing them. And I would encourage you to knowledge hub, where you have outputs of all the projects that we do, all the different activities, and they're actually in a way that you can search them, so you can find different locations that we are working with. And we did actually, we've been doing 2 workshops with international players. The first one we did was in London back in June last year, where we have representatives from, I think, close to 18 countries. And when we look at the outcomes of that, actually what we realized, pretty much every one of those countries was a developed country. So then what we did last year, actually in COP28 in Dubai, we ran another workshop, again around clusters, about how we can learn from each other, but with an emphasis and a focus on non-developed economies. And one concept that we are working with other institutions in the UK is about technologies without borders. How there are some elements of the technology that, while respecting the IP, you still can do significant know-how sharing. And I think that's also something important to keep in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we've heard from you, Mohammad, that the technology is proven. We have a lot of experience in some cases. We are innovative in other cases. But I'm really, again, want to look into the enablers. And this is mostly interaction between people, between countries, between organizations. So I'm looking to Nitin and also to Radia as, representing UN entities. What is your experience as UN entities, and this also is, of course, concerning the Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition, in making that happen, what science, industry, and also governments have already started?
I told him, since you are hosting us and we are on the umbrella of UNCCC, maybe my perspective would come since of the UN Regional Commission of Western Asia, and since our focus is in the GCC. I think we cannot speak about the just inclusive energy transition if the CCUS is not really taking scaling investment into CCUS, or let's say it's not part of the equation. This will be not a missed opportunity, but it's a must, actually. And the way we see it, we take it, I think, within the UN system. Now it's good that it's part of the discussion globally, because we cannot dissociate us from the regional compared with the global discussion. And it's good that from our perspective, specifically on the other group on negotiation, we try to really work on the Article 6.2 and 6.4 in a way that how we can really make CCUS water the question operational, all of that. And before this session, I had a discussion with some of the negotiators to see if there was something that we can say that we progressed. We didn't so far. This we should acknowledge that. And there is a reason for that. One of the other reasons that we see that it can emerge. Number one, I would say that which is positive, that individual initiatives from specifically from our region, where you have major oil and gas producing countries, definitely, you will see a huge potential in terms of serious investments at a large scale. And this is because they put in their net zero targets. This is part of the equation, and they already reporting on the work they are doing. And there are a lot of examples. It's not examples, it's not pilot projects, they are projects in the field that we can see them. So in the next decade, by 2030, 35 maximum, you will already see the result. By 2060, I assume this will be already seen in the way they do the decarbonization pathway. And now this is from our perspective, but this they cannot dissociate it from the global agenda in terms of negotiation. This is the problem, because we still feel that we are not well considered, specifically in the Article number 6, in a way that it's a region which has more impacted by climate change, and obviously there's all the efforts in terms of unlocking investment CCS should come in joint collaboration with different players, specifically financial institutions and other countries, because it's the whole value chain, it's not just the producer. Now globally, I think more effort needs to be done in order to work on the carbon market. And we, in our region, we are in the learning curve, really, and it's a long way to go in order to have something that we can report on the national, but also the regional level. Thank you.
Yeah, but it's good to know that we've already started walking, right? So I'm keen on getting your insights, Nitin, on the role of UNFCCC, because you are somehow steering this whole climate ship, if I want to call it that way, towards 2050. I think it's working.
Sorry, I didn't get your question. Can you repeat?
Yeah, what do you think is the which role can UNFCCC actively play to get that building block of a global energy transition, the building block of CCUS, going?
Well, as I said, I mean, like CCUS has been considered under the discussions, and there has been progress. I agree that we need more progress in that area, but I'm positive, I think, because supervisory body, which is looking after the Article 6.4, they have been actively engaging on this issue, and development of the standard on removals, which takes into account the issues that impact actually CCS, like, risks associated with reversal and all, putting in place proper mechanism to address how to address this reversal risk, in project activities that has been taken into the standard, which actually indicates that there has been appetite to support the work of CCUS and CCS in general to be part of the incentive mechanisms, part of the market mechanisms. And I guess, I mean, like with full operationalization, I mean, like I think it will take some time, because we need methodologies to be built upon these standards, which clearly specify, how to identify those risks that are associated with these activities before they can be credited under the mechanism, so as to ensure that environmental integrity is maintained of the mechanism. So, but I'm hopeful, I guess, I mean, like in coming months, and I'm not talking about years. I know the industry is looking after the decisions that are, the discussions that are happening here at COP. They are following what is happening in the SB in terms of methodology development related to carbon capture technologies. And I'm hopeful that as soon as we have methodologies ready, sometime middle of next year, maybe, we'll start receiving activities which can be supported.
Yeah, very nice. Good. Let me again come back to one point of your presentation, Mohammad, which is probably still a big question mark in many of your minds, which is cost, right? We saw a huge range of different costs, of course, depending on the concentration of the CO2 in the gases and in the emission streams. Can you tell us a little bit about these regular cost metrics like economies of scale, the other discussions? What are you expecting in that field to happen in the next years?
Now, if we want to talk about the cost of CCS, we cannot talk about the cost of the technology isolated from everything else. So what is expensive or cheap in one region will be different in another region. So regional aspects are very important. What is the business model that's being applied in terms, are there a push from the regulation, carbon tax, ETS? Is there incentives? So that can shift and help the industry cope with the current cost. Now, the cost, as you mentioned, is linked to the source of the carbon dioxide. if we will just take a general number, if we talk about $100 per ton as a global general number for capture from a source, I think we are not far from reality. However, over the last years, there have been an increase in engineering cost, interest rates that affected the projects of CCS similarly as it affected other projects. But at the same time, there have been some increase in policies and incentive that supported many of the projects to become economically feasible, and they were reach investment decisions, and they are now at the permitting stage and so on. Now, to bring this cost within the range, I think ideally we are aiming to see a cost of CCS as a chain in a range of $30, $35 or something like that. How to do that? We need to produce more projects. The technology needs to be deployed. So we learn from what we did. There was the project, for example, in the Boundary Dam in Canada. It was designed, operational. They published the lesson learned from that project. And they said, if we design a second one, it will be most probably 30% cheaper because we over-designed some of the instrument. We learned from what we have done, so that can go down. Technology providers are competing in bringing more advanced technologies to the market. As I mentioned, there are more than 50 technology providers with technologies lower in energy requirement and therefore lower capital investment and lower cost. Now, these technologies will vary based on the technology readiness level. So if you go for maybe a cheaper, more efficient technology, but technology level is lower, then the risk will be higher. So again, balancing that is important. An important element on the cost when we talk about the transport and the storage, there is a big geographical and regional effect there. Is the pipeline long? How long it is? Is it onshore injection, offshore injection? How deep? What is the climate and environment? So all of these are measures need to be taken into consideration when we talk about the cost. How we can reduce also the cost, and there was a good discussion on collaboration, mid-income countries and developing countries. Lesson learned, the collaboration, the international funding and facilitating that under the umbrella of different initiatives are very important because I don't think every country needs to go and invest in developing a technology and the same learnings. Learning curve is done in one part of the world, could be transferred. Yesterday, we had a good session with the Carbon Management Challenge, the ministerial meeting, where it is an important umbrella, including now 22 countries, potentially, hopefully next COP we'll see much number of countries joining that, where they will facilitate investment, financing, knowledge sharing, knowledge transfer across the region, which is an important element if we want to achieve a reduction in the cost.
And then, of course, an ideal case would be if the clusters learn from each other, right? That not everybody needs to invent the wheel. Once again, there's a new project. Isaac, you promised a question and answer session within this whole panel discussion on CCUS. And so I'd like to open the floor to all of you. And maybe we collect 2-3 questions. Then we have approximately 15 minutes. If you don't mind, I come over to you with the first question. Please say a few words to you and try to keep the question as brief as possible, that many people have the opportunity to ask them.
Do my best. It's a complex issue. I just wanted to thank Mohammad, first of all, for an excellent presentation. Obviously, CCS is vital. Mercedes in my own countries, clusters, Teesside, Humberside, really important. My problem with your presentation overall is that you included BECCS, because it's now proven quite irrefutably that wood bioenergy produces higher CO2 emissions than the fossil fuels it's meant to replace. Drax Power Corporation was expelled from the Dow S&P stock exchange in 2021 because it couldn't call its products clean. That's the clean energy index it was expelled from. Its own advisory board has told it it's no longer allowed to call its products carbon neutral. The European Investment Bank, which aims to be the global climate bank, its senior directors are now openly questioning whether they should carry on investing in solid bioenergy and questioning the carbon accounting rules. Is there not a danger that by including this massively expensive project in the UK alone, we're about to commit to 10 and 12 billion just on transition finance, which is diverting a lot of capital out of far, far more cost-effective renewables, that you will bring the whole CCS venture into disrepute and maybe damage the speed at which it needs to accumulate extra capital?
Thank you very much. Would you like to answer?
Now, I can comment in general, and then maybe Mercedes can complement, as her knowledge on the biofuel and bioenergy is far better than mine. So I think BICS has been considered, and that's why the council and the paper looked at that from the IBCC potential and how people look at it from an overall point of view. I have my own views on bioenergy. I don't want to stress them in this panel. But I think it is important when we look at any concept to have a proper life cycle assessment done on the overall emissions associated with that. And where to draw the boundaries, that is where we can get the surprises and the new numbers that we don't see it always. So that's valid for CCS, for BICS, for DAC, for renewables, for hydrogen. A proper LCE needs to be there to have an understanding of the actual carbon intensity for this technology and if it's helping or not helping in the overall climate cause.
Just a small point to add, and I think it's along the lines of what Mohammad said. I think not just for BECS, not for CCUS, what we need is really a carbon accounting that is credible and is transparent. And I think we could not point fingers only to BECS. I think that applies across. And I think that the other point in there as well, and this is something we need to be quite mindful of, is that when we talk about carbon accounting, as the name says, we do that on a carbon basis. I think we really need to look much broader to have environmental net gain, because we know that CCUS projects and hydrogen projects, they have massive demands for water. And in some cases, it could be land management in the case of BECS. So we need to have a much more holistic approach, because although carbon accounting has to be done properly, carbon accounting is not the only factor to actually measure a positive environment net gain. And I think that also has to be considered. And we pretty much have laser zero into carbon management, what is important, but is not the only environmental factor to consider.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? In front. I didn't see at first that every table has a microphone, but I still come.
And sorry, this is not so much a comment to the panel, but in reality is a comment to the question before, because of course there are certain type of BECS that can be questionable, but there are others, for example, the CO2 extracted from, for example, biogas production or for methanol productions. Those I think are clearly a net gain for them. Those production are clearly a net gain. So not all BECS come with the same kind of concerns with regards to climate impact. Yeah. No. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I just heard from Isaac that we have stricter time constraints than I expected, so I'll leave it with that question, but I'm sure the expert will be open for discussions later on, maybe in different other environments. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our panelists for sharing your various perspectives, and I would like to thank the audience for your attention and engaging questions. A special thank you to the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub for hosting this session. We look forward to the release of the upcoming publication and continuing these important conversations around this topic in the future. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.